Welcome back to the Expensive Coins History channel. Somewhere in a dusty drawer, tucked beneath old receipts and forgotten birthday cards, there is a coin that most people have touched, spent, and never thought twice about. A quarter, 25 cents. The kind of coin you toss into a tip jar without blinking. But what if I told you that one specific version of that ordinary quarter, a coin you might have held in your hand, a coin that looks almost identical to the one sitting in your pocket right now, recently changed hands for $72,000. $72,000. For a quarter. Now before you run to your coin jar, let me tell you something even more extraordinary. This isn't a story about luck. It isn't about stumbling across a treasure map or inheriting a fortune. This is a story about knowledge. About the kind of quiet, patient understanding that separates a seasoned collector from someone who just sees spare change. And by the time we finish this chapter, you're going to understand exactly why in 1987, D. Washington quarter earned that jaw-dropping price, and what signs to look for if you think you might be holding one right now. I'm so glad you're here today, because what we're diving into is one of the most fascinating chapters in modern American numismatic history. We're talking about coins from an era that many collectors overlooked for decades. The late 1980s was a strange, transitional time in American coinage. And that's precisely what makes it so rich with hidden value. Let's start at the beginning. To truly appreciate the 1987 D. Washington quarter, you need to understand where it came from. Not just the Denver Mint, where the D mint mark tells us it was struck, but the deeper context of American coinage in the mid to late 20th century. The Washington quarter has been with us since 1932. It was born during the Great Depression, commissioned by Congress to honor the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth. The original design came from sculptor John Flanagan, who based his portrait of Washington on a famous 1785 bust created by French sculptor Jean-Antoine Houdon. That bust, made when Washington was in his early 50s, was widely considered one of the most accurate likenesses of the first president ever captured. Think about that for a moment. When you hold a Washington quarter, any Washington quarter, you are holding a portrait that traces its lineage back to a man who sat for a sculptor in the years just after the American Revolution. There is a living historical thread running from Houdon's studio in Paris all the way to a coin struck in Denver, Colorado, in 1987. That is not nothing. That is the kind of detail that makes a collector fall in love with a piece of metal. Now, the Washington quarter design that Flanagan created in 1932 remained largely intact for decades. There were modifications over the years, most notably in 1999 when the state quarters program began, but in 1987, we were still in what collectors refer to as the classic clad era. Since 1965, quarters had been made from a copper-nickel clad composition rather than the silver that had been used since the coin's origin. That transition away from silver is significant, and it actually plays a fascinating role in why certain coins from this era carry such unexpected value. Here's something most casual observers don't realize. When the U.S. Mint shifted to clad coinage in 1965, they were responding to a silver shortage. The country was quite literally running out of silver to put into coins because people were hoarding them. The metal content of a silver quarter was worth more as raw silver than as currency, so coins were disappearing from circulation at an alarming rate. The switch to copper-nickel clad solved the immediate economic problem, but it created a psychological divide in the collector community that echoes to this very day. Many traditionalists lost interest in modern coinage. They turned their attention to the pre-1965 silver coins, the Barber quarters, the Standing Liberty quarters, the early Washington quarters, and they largely dismissed anything struck after the clad transition as common, unworthy of serious collection. That dismissal, that collective turning away, is one of the most important factors in understanding why coins like the 1987 D can be worth a fortune today. Because while the seasoned collectors of the 1970s and 1980s were chasing silver and copper rarities, something interesting was quietly happening in the modern clad series. Certain coins were being struck in limited quantities. Certain coins were being struck with dies that created spectacular surfaces. Certain coins were escaping quality control in ways that produced breathtaking errors. And almost nobody was paying attention. The Denver Mint in 1987 was a busy operation. The facility had been producing coins since 1906, and by the late 20th century, it was one of the most productive mints in the world. In 1987, the Denver Mint struck over 655 million quarters. Let that number wash over you for a second. 655 million coins. That sounds like the opposite of rarity, doesn't it? And for the vast majority of those coins, you would be absolutely right. A standard circulated 1987 D quarter is worth face value. It's worth 25 cents. But rarity in numismatics is not always about low mintage numbers. Sometimes rarity is about condition. Sometimes it's about specific die varieties. And sometimes it's about an extraordinary combination of both factors that produces a coin so exceptional, so perfectly preserved, so visually stunning that it occupies a category entirely its own. This is where our story gets genuinely exciting. The concept that drives the extraordinary value of elite modern coins is the professional grading scale, and more specifically, the upper reaches of that scale. Coins are graded on a numerical system that runs from 1 to 70, with 70 representing a coin in absolutely perfect, flawless, mint state condition. A coin graded MS 70, mint state, perfect, is essentially a theoretical ideal, a coin with no marks, no contact blemishes, no weak strikes, no toning, no imperfections of any kind under 5 times magnification. For common coins struck by the hundreds of millions, achieving MS 70 status is extraordinarily rare because the minting and handling process itself introduces tiny imperfections. Coins bang against each other in bins. They travel through automated counting machines. They get bagged and transported and touched by dozens of hands before they ever reach a collector. The 1987 D Washington quarter that commands collector attention is not the coin that circulated in cash registers across America. It is the coin that somehow, through a combination of careful die preparation, a fortunate position in the production run, and extraordinary preservation, emerged in a condition that stops professional graders cold. When a grader at one of the major third-party grading services, the organizations that authenticate and grade coins for the market, examines a coin under magnification and assigns it a perfect or near-perfect grade, they are making a statement about rarity that transcends mintage numbers entirely. Consider this remarkable fact. Of the more than 655 million 1987 D quarters struck, the number that have been certified in the highest mint state grades by professional grading services can be counted on one hand. Some grades have precisely 0 examples certified. We are talking about a genuine rarity hidden within an enormous mintage, like finding a single specific grain of sand on a very long beach. Now let's talk about the coin itself in more detail, because the design matters enormously to collectors and to the story of why these pieces are so compelling. The obverse, that's the front of the coin, features John Flanagan portrait of Washington in left-facing profile. The word Liberty arcs across the top of the coin, a date appears at the bottom, and the phrase, "In God We Trust," sits to Washington's left. On a perfectly struck example, Washington's hair detail is crisp and complete. Every strand, every curl, the precise rendering of his collar and coat, all of it comes together in a portrait that, when struck with fresh dyes at full pressure onto a properly prepared planchet, achieves a sculptural quality that photographs cannot fully capture. You have to hold it. You have to tilt it under a light and watch the luster move across the surface like liquid metal. The reverse of the Washington quarter features an eagle with wings spread, clutching arrows, and an olive branch. The eagle stands before a shield, and the inscriptions "United States of America" and $quarter frame the design. What collectors look for on a high-grade example is the complete, sharp rendering of every feather on the eagle's wings and breast. On a weakly struck coin, which is extremely common in the clad series, these feathers can appear flat, almost mushy, lacking definition. On a perfectly struck example, each feather is individually visible, with clear separation and three-dimensional relief that speaks to the quality of both the die and the strike. The mint mark, that small d that appears on the obverse near Washington's hairline, tells us this coin was born in Denver. In 1987, mint marks were applied to dies before they were sent to the coining floor, a process that had been standardized after years of hand-punched mint marks that occasionally produced doubling or tilting errors. But the standardization of the process didn't eliminate variation entirely. Die preparation, die polish, die wear, all of these factors influenced the final appearance of the coin struck from any given die. And it's this variation that creates the population spread from common circulated coins all the way up to the extraordinary high-grade specimens that collectors compete fiercely to own. Let me share something that veteran collectors talk about when they describe the experience of seeing a truly exceptional modern coin for the first time. There is a quality called cartwheel luster that describes the way a perfectly preserved coin reflects light as you rotate it. Imagine holding a coin flat and tilting it slowly in bright light. On a worn or bag-marked coin, the surface is dull, the light scatters randomly, there's no coherent reflection. But on a pristine, never circulated coin with its original mint luster fully intact, the light moves in sweeping arcs across the surface, like the spokes of a wheel spinning outward from the center. Some collectors describe it as the coin coming alive. It's not an exaggeration. When you see a genuine cartwheel on a Washington quarter that grades in the highest levels of mint state, you understand immediately that you are looking at something fundamentally different from the coins you encounter in everyday life. Here is a story that circulates in numismatic circles, the kind of story that gets passed around at coin shows and in collectors' forums. A dealer in the Midwest, a man who had been buying and selling coins for over 30 years, received a large lot of unsearched rolls from a small-town bank that was closing. These were original rolls from the 1980s, still in their original paper wrappers, never opened, never searched. He bought them for a modest sum, fully expecting to find nothing more than face value, plus a small premium for the original roll packaging. When he opened the first few rolls and found nothing extraordinary, he almost set the rest aside. But something made him keep going. Halfway through a roll of 1987 D quarters, he found a coin that stopped him cold. Even with the naked eye, it was visibly different from its neighbors. The surfaces were mirror-sharp. The luster was blazing. He pulled out his loupe, examined it carefully, and knew immediately he was holding something exceptional. That coin was eventually submitted to a professional grading service and came back in a grade that placed it in the top tier of known examples. The dealer, who had paid a fraction of a cent per coin for the lot, held on to it for several years while the market for high-grade modern coins continued to develop and mature. When he finally sold it, the price reflected exactly the kind of value that serious collectors assign to truly exceptional rarity. Regardless of whether the denomination is a dollar or a quarter, stories like this fuel the passion that drives millions of Americans to examine their change more carefully, to search through rolls from the bank, to attend coin shows with an eye toward discovery. And there is real educational value in these stories, because they reinforce a fundamental truth about numismatics. Value is not always where you expect to find it. The most celebrated, expensive coins in the world are not always ancient or exotic. Sometimes they are hiding in plain sight, in denominations so ordinary that most people never give them a second look. The collecting community around Washington quarters has evolved dramatically over the past 20 to 30 years. In the early days of third-party grading, which became widespread in the late 1980s and early 1990s, very few people were submitting modern clad coins for grading. The focus was on earlier American coinage, on gold coins, on classic silver-type coins. Modern quarters were considered beneath the dignity of serious collection, but a handful of visionary collectors saw the opportunity that this attitude created. They began systematically acquiring the finest known examples of modern Washington quarters, submitting them for grading, and building registry sets, collections defined not by the quantity of coins, but by the quality. If you held the top-graded example of a given date and mint mark, your coin occupied the summit of the known population. And at the summit, price is determined not by market averages, but by the willingness of competing collectors to outbid each other for the privilege of owning the finest known example of a particular coin. This competitive dynamic, what collectors call the registry set phenomenon, has been one of the most powerful forces in driving values for modern coins over the past 2 decades. Collectors who built early registry sets in modern Washington quarters at a time when nobody else was paying attention are now sitting on holdings that have appreciated by factors that would be extraordinary in any investment category. Not that coins should primarily be viewed as investments. The collectors who love this hobby most deeply are motivated by passion, history, and the thrill of discovery, not portfolio management. But the financial dimension of what has happened to coins like the 1987 D is impossible to ignore and genuinely important for anyone who takes the hobby seriously. There is something profound about the way numismatics connects us to history, and it's worth pausing to reflect on that for a moment before we talk about value. In 1987, the United States was in the middle of the Reagan era. The Cold War was still being waged, though its end was closer than anyone realized. The Dow Jones Industrial Average crossed 2,000 for the first time in January of that year. Dirty Dancing was in theaters. Walk Like an Egyptian was on the radio. The Iran-Contra affair was consuming Washington's political attention. American life in 1987 had a particular texture, a particular feel, a particular set of anxieties and enthusiasms. And every coin struck in Denver that year carries within it a tiny fragment of that moment. When a collector holds a 1987 D. Washington quarter in mint state, they are holding a physical artifact of a specific year in American life, a year that has now receded into history and can never be recreated. The coins that survive in perfect condition are, in a very real sense, time capsules. They represent a version of 1987 that escaped the wear and damage of time. Most coins from that year circulated, got worn down, absorbed the scratches and marks of decades of exchange. The perfect ones, the ones that somehow made it from the mint floor to a collector's hands without a single imperfection, those are the survivors. And survival, in numismatics as in so many other domains, commands a premium. As we approach the moment you've been waiting for, the value of this coin, I want to make sure you understand what that number represents. When a coin like the 1987 D. Washington quarter sells for a remarkable sum, that price reflects the convergence of several factors. The rarity of the specific grade, the depth of the collector market for that series, the condition of the market at the time of sale, and the simple but powerful dynamic of two motivated collectors competing for a single coin that only one of them can own. There are Washington quarter collectors who have spent decades building their sets. They have acquired thousands of coins. They have studied the series from every angle. And when a coin appears that would complete or elevate their collection, a coin in a grade that rarely comes to market, a coin that might be the finest known example of a particular date and mint, they will pay whatever it takes. The price is not irrational. It is the rational expression of scarcity meeting deep, informed, passionate demand. The 1987 D. Washington quarter, in its finest certified state, represents exactly that convergence. It is a coin that most Americans have handled without recognition, a coin lost in the enormous sea of its 655 million piece mintage, and yet a coin that, in its rarest form, commands the kind of price that makes headlines, that makes casual observers do a double take, that makes collectors everywhere look a little more carefully at the coins in their possession. So here it is. The number you've been building toward throughout this entire chapter. A 1987 D. Washington quarter, certified in the finest known grade by a leading professional grading service, has sold for $72,000. $72,000. For 25 cents, that number is not an anomaly. It is the logical conclusion of everything we've discussed. The rarity within abundance, the survival of perfection across decades, the passion of collectors who understand what they're looking at, and the deep human desire to own the absolute finest example of something beautiful and historically significant. If you have a 1987 D quarter, look at it carefully. Really look at it. And if it has that blazing luster, that crisp strike, that untouched quality that makes a coin seem almost too perfect to be real, treat it gently. You may be holding more than 25 cents. Stay with us. Because in the next chapter, we are turning our attention to another coin from this same remarkable era, a coin that shares its lineage with the 1987 D but tells a completely different story. And the price attached to the finest known example? It's even higher. There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a room at a coin auction when the auctioneer announces a starting bid that makes people set down their paddles and stare. Not because the coin is ancient, not because it's made of gold, but because it's a quarter. A single, ordinary-looking quarter that most people alive in 1988 held in their hands, dropped into vending machines, left on countertops as loose change. The silence comes from disbelief. And then, as the bidding climbs, past 10,000, past 30,000, past 50,000, the disbelief transforms into something else entirely. It transforms into the dawning recognition that the person who wins this auction understands something profound about rarity, about survival, about the hidden architecture of value that exists inside objects so commonplace we stop seeing them altogether. Welcome back to the Expensive Coins History channel. You just finished Chapter 1, where we explored the extraordinary story of the 1987 D. Washington quarter and the $72,000 price tag that came with its finest certified example. If that number surprised you, buckle in. Because the coin we're examining in this chapter, the 1988 D. Washington quarter, carries an even more remarkable story and an even more staggering price. And the way we're going to get there is completely different from how we got to the last number. Because these two coins, while born from the same series, the same mint, just 1 year apart, are separated by a world of difference in terms of history, context, and the collector journey that surrounds them. Let me begin not with a mint or a mintage number, but with a moment. A human moment that captures why coins from 1988 carry a particular emotional weight for collectors who came of age in that era. 1988 was a year of transitions. The Reagan presidency was in its final stretch. George H.W. Bush was on the campaign trail, promising continuity while a nation debated what it wanted to become. The Summer Olympics were held in Seoul, South Korea, the first time since 1976 that both the United States and the Soviet Union participated in the same games, a detail that felt significant in the context of Cold War thaw. Don't Worry, Be Happy by Bobby McFerrin was the song of the year. Rain Man was in theaters. The first commercial internet service providers were just beginning to appear on the horizon, though almost nobody understood yet what that meant for the future. For ordinary Americans in 1988, a quarter was something you kept in your car for parking meters. It was what you fed into a payphone when you needed to call someone and didn't want to wait to get home. It was the coin you counted out carefully at a gas station convenience store when you were a few cents short. It was utterly, completely, thoroughly ordinary. And that is exactly what makes what we're about to discuss so extraordinary. The Denver Mint in 1988 was running at full capacity. The facility produced an enormous quantity of Washington quarters that year, over 562 million coins bearing the D mint mark. 562 million. The scale of that number is almost impossible to conceptualize. If you stacked 562 million quarters on top of each other, the column would stretch roughly 62,000 miles into the sky, more than a quarter of the way to the moon. These coins flooded into circulation across the American economy, passing through millions of hands, sitting in billions of transactions, wearing down slowly over years and decades of use. But here is where the 1988 D story diverges sharply from what you might expect, and why it deserves its own chapter, its own distinct analysis, its own unique place in the pantheon of modern American numismatics. The story of the 1988 D. Washington quarter is not just a story about survival in perfect condition. It is a story about what happened at the Denver Mint during a specific window of production that year, a story about die quality, about planchet preparation, and about a brief, unrepeatable confluence of technical factors that produced a small number of coins so visually stunning, so perfectly executed, that professional graders who have spent their careers examining coins describe them in language that bordered on reverence. To understand this, you need to know a little about how coins are actually made, and specifically about the relationship between die quality and coin quality. A coining die is a hardened steel cylinder with a mirror image of the coin's design engraved into its face. When the die strikes a planchet, the blank disc of metal that will become a coin, the design transfers from the die to the coin under enormous pressure. The quality of that transfer depends on several factors: the freshness of the die, the preparation of the planchet surface, the alignment of the dies, the pressure of the strike, and the condition of the coining equipment. In a mint producing hundreds of millions of coins, dies wear down. A fresh die produces coins with sharp, detailed, brilliant surfaces. As a die accumulates strikes, and a single die can produce hundreds of thousands of coins before it's retired, the design elements gradually flatten, the surfaces lose their crispness, and the resulting coins, while still technically correct and usable as currency, lack the visual quality of the first coin struck from that die. This is why, across any large mintage, there is an enormous spectrum of quality. The coins struck from the freshest dies are categorically superior to the coins struck from tired, worn dies. And within the coins struck from fresh dies, There is a further spectrum determined by the quality of the planchet itself. In 1988, during a specific production run at the Denver Mint, something came together that doesn't come together often. A set of exceptionally well-prepared dies met a batch of planchets that had been polished and prepared to an unusually high standard. The result was a small group of coins, a very small group, representing a tiny fraction of those 562 million quarters that emerged from the coining press with surfaces of such quality, such reflectivity, such precise detail, that they were fundamentally different from everything else produced that year. Collectors who have examined these coins describe the experience in almost identical terms. They look like they couldn't possibly have been made for circulation. They look like they were made to be admired. Now, here is a detail that adds another layer of intrigue to the 1988 D story, and this is the kind of detail that separates collectors who truly know this series from those who are just beginning to explore it. In 1988, there was a growing awareness within the numismatic community that the modern clad series, Washington quarters, Roosevelt dimes, Jefferson nickels, was beginning to receive more serious collector attention than it had in previous decades. The registry set movement was gaining momentum. Third-party grading services were becoming established and trusted, and a small, prescient group of collectors began systematically acquiring original bank-wrapped rolls of modern coins, reasoning that if any high-grade survivors existed, they would most likely be found in rolls that had never been searched, never been opened, preserved exactly as they were when they left the mint. The collectors who pursued this strategy in the late 1980s and early 1990s were, in hindsight, extraordinarily well-positioned. They were buying rolls at face value plus a modest premium, often from small banks and credit unions in regions that had low coin circulation traffic, rural areas where rolls might sit in a vault for years without being opened. When they found high-grade coins in those rolls, the coins had been preserved in the dark, undisturbed, their original luster untouched by air, light, or human handling. Some of those coins, when eventually submitted to grading services, came back in grades that placed them among the finest known examples of their date and mint mark. There is a collector, a retired schoolteacher from a small town in Colorado, whose story has been told at numismatic conventions with genuine admiration. She began collecting Washington quarters in the early 1990s, initially as a hobby to share with her grandchildren. She started acquiring rolls from her local bank, nothing more exotic than that, and she developed a practice of examining every coin under a bright desk lamp before deciding whether to keep it or return it to circulation. She wasn't a professional. She didn't have expensive equipment. She had patience, a good eye, and the kind of methodical attention that good teachers develop over decades in the classroom. Over several years of searching rolls, she accumulated a small collection of what she described simply as the pretty ones, coins that caught the light in a way that others didn't. When a coin dealer at a local show examined her collection and explained what she had, she was genuinely surprised. Several of her quarters were in grades that professional services would certify at the top of the known population. Among them were examples of the 1988 D that, when submitted, came back in grades that established them among the finest certified examples of that date. Her investment in those coins had been minimal. Their certified value was something else entirely. She has said in interviews that she still doesn't think of them primarily as valuable objects. She thinks of them as beautiful objects. The value, she says, is just what happens when enough people agree that something beautiful is also rare. That story captures something essential about the 1988 D Washington Quarter and about the Washington Quarter series in general. This is a coin series that rewards careful observation. It rewards the kind of attention that most people stopped paying to their change sometime in the middle of the 20th century. It rewards the understanding that rarity is not always printed on a label or announced with fanfare. Sometimes it's hiding in a roll from the bank. Sometimes it's sitting in a coffee can in someone's basement. Sometimes it's the coin you almost spent this morning. Let's talk about what makes a truly exceptional 1988 D Washington Quarter visually distinct from its ordinary counterparts, because this is information that has practical value for anyone who takes our discussion seriously and decides to examine their own collection or begin searching rolls. The first thing to look for is the strike. On a high-grade example, the hair detail on Washington's portrait is fully defined. You should be able to see individual strands of hair across the entire head, from the forehead to the back of the neck. The curl above Washington's ear, a distinctive feature of Flanagan design, should be fully three-dimensional, not soft or mushy. The motto, "In God We Trust," should have clean, sharp letter edges, not letters that appear to fade or blend into the field of the coin. On the reverse, the eagle should command your attention immediately. On a perfectly struck example, every primary feather on the wings is individually defined, with clear separation between feathers and sharp edges that cast tiny shadows under direct light. The breast feathers, often the weakest point on struck examples, should be fully rendered with visible texture rather than appearing as a flat, undifferentiated surface. The inscriptions should be sharp and clean, and the entire design should sit with authority in the coin's field, not sinking into it, not floating above it, but occupying the space with the precision of a well-executed sculpture. Then there are the surfaces themselves. The fields, the flat, open areas of the coin's face and reverse, should be essentially free of contact marks, those tiny nicks and hairlines that result from coins touching other coins during the minting and handling process. On a truly exceptional example, the fields have a quality that experienced collectors describe as deep or glassy, a reflectivity that suggests undisturbed metal, a surface that has never been compromised. When you tilt such a coin under a light source, the field should flash with a brilliance that is almost uncomfortable to look at directly. The design elements, by contrast, appear frosted against that brilliant background, a contrast that photographers call cameo, and that represents one of the most visually spectacular qualities a coin can possess. The luster on an exceptional 1988 D runs continuously across the coin's surfaces in the cartwheel pattern we discussed in the previous chapter. But the specific quality of Denver Mint luster in 1988 has a character that experienced collectors associate specifically with this period of production. It tends toward the warmer end of the spectrum, not the cold, almost bluish brilliance you sometimes see in Philadelphia Mint coins of the same era, but a richer, more golden quality that many collectors find deeply appealing. This is a subtle distinction, the kind of thing that only becomes perceptible after you've examined dozens or hundreds of examples. But it's the kind of distinction that serious collectors use as an authentication tool, a way of confirming that what they're looking at has the genuine character of a Denver Mint coin from this specific period. There is a broader story here about the Denver Mint's role in American coinage history that deserves a moment of reflection because it adds texture to our understanding of every coin that carries the D Mint mark. The Denver Mint was established in 1863, initially as an assay office to process the enormous quantities of gold and silver being extracted from Colorado's mountains during the mining boom. It was converted to a full coining facility in 1906, and since then it has served as one of the primary production centers for American circulating coinage. The men and women who work at the Denver Mint, the press operators, the die preparers, the quality control inspectors, are carrying on a tradition of craftsmanship that is now well over a century old. When you hold a 1988 D Washington quarter, you are holding the product of that tradition. Someone's hands prepared the dies. Someone monitored the press as your coin was struck. Someone handled the coin as it came off the press and dropped into a collection bin. These are anonymous human moments, scattered across a production line designed for industrial efficiency rather than individual attention. And yet the coins that emerged from those moments of anonymous labor carry, in their finest examples, a beauty and a precision that speaks to the quiet pride of craft. The worker who set up that particular press on that particular day in 1988 did not know they were creating a future collector's treasure. They were doing their job. But the result, when the conditions were right and the stars aligned, was something genuinely exceptional. The numismatic market for coins like the 1988 D has evolved in ways that continue to surprise even veteran observers. 20 years ago, if you had told most professional coin dealers that a 1988 D Washington quarter would someday sell for a price that rivaled a mid-range automobile, they would have laughed politely and changed the subject. The conventional wisdom was that modern clad coins were common, that the market for them was thin, that there was no serious collector base to sustain high prices. That conventional wisdom was wrong, and the collectors who understood why it was wrong built positions in these coins that paid off handsomely as the market matured. What changed? Several things converged over the course of the 1990s and 2000s. The registry set phenomenon created a competitive market for top-graded coins in every series, including modern Washington quarters. The expansion of third-party grading services made it possible to establish reliable population data, to know with precision how many examples of a given coin existed in a given grade. When that data revealed that certain date and mint mark combinations in the Washington quarter series had zero or near zero examples certified in the top grades, the implications for value were clear to anyone who understood basic supply and demand dynamics. A coin with zero certified examples in a particular grade is not just rare, it is unique. And uniqueness, in a competitive collector market, commands prices that cannot be predicted by any conventional valuation formula. The educational dimension of this story is worth emphasizing for viewers who are relatively new to coin collecting. The lesson of the 1988 D Washington quarter, like the lesson of the 1987 D we discussed in the previous chapter, is fundamentally about the relationship between knowledge and opportunity. The collectors who built significant holdings in high-grade modern Washington quarters did so not because they were lucky, but because they understood something that the broader market did not yet understand. They recognized rarity before the market recognized it. They acted on that recognition while others were looking elsewhere. And when the market eventually caught up to what they already knew, the value of their understanding was reflected in the prices their coins commanded. This is the deeper invitation that the world of numismatics extends to everyone who engages with it seriously. Not the promise of easy money, because the coin market, like any market, requires knowledge and patience and sometimes accepts no shortcuts, but the promise that understanding creates opportunity. If you understand what makes a 1988 D Washington quarter truly rare, you will look at quarters differently for the rest of your life. You will examine them rather than ignore them. You will notice the quality of their surfaces, the sharpness of their strikes, the condition of their luster. And every now and then, in a roll from the bank or a collection you inherit or a jar of change you've been ignoring for years, you might find something that rewards that attention in a way that stops you cold. That we are collectors here. We are students of American history, American craft, and the remarkable human tendency to find beauty and meaning in even the most ordinary objects. The 1988 D Washington quarter is ordinary in its brilliance. In its finest form, it is anything but, and so we arrive, at last, at the number that anchors everything we've discussed. The finest certified example of a 1988 D Washington quarter, a coin that emerged from the Denver Mint's production line in 1988, survived without a single mark or imperfection across decades, was eventually recognized and certified by professional graders as representing the absolute apex of its kind, has sold for $76,500, $76,500, for a coin that was legal tender for 25 cents. For a coin struck alongside 562 million identical brothers and sisters, virtually all of which are worth exactly what they say they're worth. For a coin that passed through countless hands without anyone noticing, until the one pair of hands that knew what to look for finally held it under a light and understood. That price is a testament to rarity. It is a testament to condition. It is a testament to the depth and passion of the collecting community that has grown around these coins. And it is a testament to the remarkable truth at the heart of numismatics, that history, beauty, and rarity combine to create value in the most unexpected places. If you are watching this today and you have a coin jar, a forgotten collection, a roll of quarters you picked up from the bank, look carefully. Look at the date. Look at the mint mark. Look at the surfaces under good light. You may be holding a piece of history that is worth far more than its face value. You may be holding the coin that changes everything. Thank you for spending this time with us on the Expensive Coins History channel. If this story moved you, if it sparked your curiosity or made you want to look more carefully at the coins in your life, please like this video, share it with someone who loves history or coins or simply appreciates the thrill of hidden value, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Because the history of American coinage is full of chapters exactly like this, full of ordinary objects hiding extraordinary secrets, and we are just getting started.